this video, we want to take a look at the configuration of MST, Multiple Spanning Tree Protocol. And we talked in our previous video about the theory of MST, and we said that at its essence, it's trying to minimize the number of spanning tree instances we have while giving us an optimal spanning tree for each of our VLANs. Because different VLANs, they might have different traffic flows. But instead of having a separate instance of spanning tree for every single VLAN, we might have several VLANs that would benefit from the same spanning tree with the same root bridge. That's what we're going to set up in this video. And here I've configured 4 non-default VLANs. Let's do a show VLAN brief command, and you see that we have VLANs 100, 200, 300, and 400. Let's assign VLANs 100 and 300 to the same instance, and let's assign VLAN 200 to a different instance. And we're not going to assign the default VLAN of 1 or VLAN 400 to anything, and we'll see what happens to those VLANs. But let's get started by defining our 2 instances. We'll go into global configuration mode, and I'll say spanning -tree MST configuration. Now I'll say instance, given instance number, we'll say for instance 1, we're going to create a spanning tree for VLANs 100 and 300. For instance 2, we're going to create a spanning tree for VLAN 200. And we need to give that same configuration on all of our switches in this topology. So let's go over to switch 2 and give exactly the same set of commands. I'll say spanning-tree MST configuration, instance 1, VLAN 100, 300, instance 2, VLAN 200. One switch to go. Let's go over to switch 3, and we'll go into global configuration mode, and we'll say spanning-tree MST configuration. Instance 1 is going to be for VLANs 100 and 300. Instance 2 is going to be for VLAN 200. Now that I've defined my instances, we want to go in and say which bridge is the root bridge for our different instances. So let's say that switch SW1 is going to be the primary root bridge for instance 1, and it's going to be a secondary root bridge for instance 2. Here's how we configure that. We go into global configuration mode and we say spanning-tree MST. We give the instance number of 1, and I'll say root primary. Now for MST instance 2, I'll say I want to be the secondary root. To do that, I'll say root secondary. And let's imagine that switch SW3 is going to be the root for instance 2, and it's going to be the secondary root for instance 1. So let's go over to SW3 and give those commands. And we'll say spanning-tree MST instance 2. I want to be the primary root. For instance 1, I'll be the secondary root. And the final thing we need to do is set the STP mode on all of our switches to MST. So let's go through all of our switches and do that. On switch SW1, we'll say spanning-tree mode. Context sensitive help shows that we could use the default of PVST. We could do rapid PVST, which we'll talk about in an upcoming video, or we can do MST. We're going to do MST, and we're going to do that on all of our switches. Let's go over to switch SW2, and we'll say spanning-tree mode MST. One switch to go. Over on switch SW3, we'll say spanning-tree mode MST. And now that we've configured multiple spanning tree protocol, let's verify it. We'll just stay here on switch SW3 and do a show spanning-tree summary command. And this tells us that this switch is in MST mode. And it tells us that we are the root bridge for MST instance 2. But notice it shows us 3 MST instances. We have 3 instances and one we did not define. This is MST instance 0. Well, 0 is going to contain all the VLANs that we did not assign to another instance. So in our case, it's going to be VLAN 1. So in our case, it's going to be VLAN 1 and VLAN 400. They'll belong to that instance. Now let's verify that from the perspective of switch SW3, we really are the root for instance 2. We'll go take a look at the instance 2 VLAN of 200, and we'll see that we're the secondary root for VLAN 100, which is a member of instance 1. And we'll see what's up with instance 0 as well. But first of all, let's take a look at one of the VLANs in instance 1, VLAN 100. I'll do a show Spanning-Tree VLAN 100. We said we wanted to be the secondary root for instance 1, and we see that we're not the root. The root has this MAC address, and you can see from the topology on screen, that's switch SW1. That's who we set as the root for instance 1. But notice that our priority is not the default priority of 32.768, it's 28.672. And that's because we said we wanted to be the secondary root. What about VLAN 200? That's a member of instance 2. We should be the root for this VLAN, and we are. It says this bridge is the root. And if we take a look at VLAN 1, which we did not assign to an instance, and therefore it became a member of instance 0, we see that the root is, looking at the MAC address, it appears to be SW2. And the reason is not because of any configuration we gave, it was because it had the lowest MAC address. That was the default tiebreaker if we don't manipulate the bridge priority. The lowest MAC address is going to become the root. And in this case, for VLAN 1, it's going to be switch SW2. And notice that for each of these instances, there's a different topology for our spanning tree. For instance 0, switch 2 is the root. For instance 1, switch SW1 is the root. And for instance 2, we're the root on SW3. And that's a look at how to configure MST.